It only took 15 seconds. 3 powerful men, 1 unarmed woman, and a stranger no one saw coming. He didn't speak. He didn't boast. But in those 15 seconds, he changed everything. What followed would expose a conspiracy, test the strength of a father's love, and reveal that sometimes the quietest men carry the loudest truths. If powerful, emotional stories with justice, heart, and healing are what you live for, take a second to subscribe. Because what you're about to witness is not just a story. It's a reminder that the world still needs heroes, even if they wear aprons instead of armor. The Bellevue was a temple of glass and gold. Crystal chandeliers hummed above crisp white tablecloths and polished cutlery. Conversations were soft, calculated, elegant. Waiters in pressed vests weaved through tables like dancers in a well-rehearsed ballet. It was the kind of place where wealth didn't need to announce itself. It simply existed, like the scent of truffle oil in the air. And tonight, at table 6, sat Heather Langford. She was every inch the woman the world expected her to be. Poised, polished, unapproachable. CEO of Langward Biotech, widowed young, one of Forbes's Women to Watch. She wore a black silk dress with sleeves like folded wings and diamond earrings that caught the low light. Her phone lay untouched on the table. Her eyes didn't flicker. Her shoulders were straight. Alone. Until they arrived. 3 men stepped in like they owned the oxygen in the room. Thomas Bell, Ray Kessler, and Devin Grange. High-ranking executives of TGC Capital. Heather knew their faces from boardrooms and battlefields of corporate negotiation. They weren't her friends. They weren't even her equals. But tonight, they didn't care about hierarchy. Only humiliation. They didn't sit at their own table. They walked straight to hers. "Well, look at this," Thomas said with a smirk. Queen Heather, dining alone. Tragic, really. She didn't look up. Ray pulled out the chair opposite her, spinning it around and straddling it like a bored teenager. "We heard your board rejected our offer again," he said. "That's got a sting." "Not as much as your breath," she replied, lifting her wine glass without flinching. Laughter followed, but not hers. Devin leaned close, his tie swinging over the candlelight. "Come on, Heather. Don't be like that. You were so much warmer before the promotion. Remember Miami? Or has power made you cold?" "I don't remember men like you," she said sharply. "I don't catalog parasites." There was a beat of silence. Then came the hand. Thomas's hand, thick, veined, and arrogant, reaching across the table to grip her wrist. The wineglass tipped slightly. Not enough to spill. Heather's breath caught, but she didn't pull away. Around the restaurant, heads turned. Murmurs rose, then fell. A waiter froze mid-step, unsure. The hostess at the front shifted uncomfortably. No one moved. No one interfered. 3 men, 1 woman, and a room full of silence. Until a sound broke it. A soft, deliberate clink. Table 10, near the window. A man placed his glass of water down. He wore an old military jacket, faded green, edges frayed. Underneath, a plain t-shirt. Nothing expensive, nothing clean-cut. His boots were dusty, his posture relaxed, his hair too long for the Bellevue, and his jaw too shadowed. Next to him sat a little girl, no more than 7, with a half-eaten plate of spaghetti and a sketchbook open in front of her. "Daddy," she whispered. "That lady looks scared." He didn't respond right away. He watched, listened, measured. Then he stood. The movement was unhurried, silent, almost apologetic. He walked across the room, past stunned waiters, past frozen diners. His hands didn't clench, his eyes didn't burn. He stopped just behind Thomas Bell and said quietly, "Let go of her." Thomas turned, already smirking. "Who the hell?" He didn't finish. In one motion, the man gripped Thomas's wrist, twisted it outward, and forced his arm down to the white linen tablecloth with a dull thud. A gasp swept through the room. Thomas yelped, but the man had already pivoted, stepping between Heather and Ray with surgical precision. Ray stood to intervene. Big mistake. A leg sweep took him off balance. His body hit the carpet like a sack of flour. Before Devon could even register what had happened, the man spun toward him and locked his elbow in a joint hold, twisting just enough to immobilize, not enough to break. 15 seconds, 3 men, down, disarmed, humiliated, and not a single glass broken. Not a single chair overturned. Every move precise, controlled, masterful. Heather stared at him, this stranger in a worn-out jacket who moved like a phantom. The entire restaurant seemed to hold its breath. He looked at her once, just once, and nodded. Then he turned, walked back to his daughter, picked up the check, ruffled her hair. And just like that, he was gone. Outside, the night wrapped around them like an old coat. The little girl clutched his hand. "Was that jujitsu, Daddy?" He smiled faintly. "No, that was just not looking away." They disappeared into the dark, leaving behind shock, silence, and a trail of unspoken questions. Heather remained frozen for a long time, her wrist still tingling where Thomas had grabbed her. But the warmth she felt wasn't from pain. It was from the memory of that man's voice. Not loud, not angry, just calm. The footage was grainy. 2 different angles, both from security cameras mounted high above the Bellevue's crystal-lit dining hall. One captured the moment a man in a faded green jacket stood from table 10. The other caught a brief flash of movement. 3 men hitting the ground, one after the other, like dominoes in slow motion. There was no audio, no name on the check, no clear view of his face. Just the blur of a man whose every move was impossibly clean, precise, efficient, deliberate, then gone. Heather watched the footage again, then again, and again. 14 times before midnight. It wasn't just about what he did. It was how he did it. She'd seen self-defense before, raw, desperate, messy. But this was controlled, as if he could see every angle before it unfolded, as if he'd run the scenario in his head 100 times before stepping forward. And he didn't say a word. Not to the men he dropped, not to the staff, not to her. He'd placed his glass on the table, like a pianist laying down the final note, then vanished. Heather sat in her penthouse living room, lights dimmed, laptop open, replaying the moment over and over. The city outside sparkled through floor-to-ceiling windows, but she felt no comfort in the view. She'd always been in control, a master of forecasts, numbers, mergers, risk matrices. But tonight, she felt small, rattled. Not by the assault. She'd faced corporate predators her whole career, but by the sudden collision with something rare. Unrequested protection. She wasn't used to being rescued, not by strangers, not by ghosts. Her wrist still bore the faint pressure of Thomas Bell's grip, but what haunted her wasn't fear. It was the question. Who was he? The restaurant's manager had pulled the security footage immediately, at her request. Legal protocol. Crisis management. But she'd sensed something else in his voice when he'd whispered. He was like, trained, ma'am. Military, maybe. He didn't even breathe heavy. She had asked the hostess, the waiter, even the bartender. No one knew him. Some had seen the little girl with him, curly hair, white dress, colored pencils on the table. But no last name, no receipt, no reservation. Just cash in full and a polite nod. They were sitting in the corner, one waiter said. Didn't order much. Looked like they didn't belong here. That part stung, because now she couldn't stop thinking about them. At 3:12 a.m., Heather closed the laptop. She padded barefoot to the kitchen, poured herself a glass of water, and stood by the sink, the cityscape a quiet galaxy behind her. Why had he helped her? He could have kept eating, kept silent like everyone else. No one would have blamed him. But he didn't. He stood. He acted. He left. No card. No name. No smug look of "you owe me." Just silence. That silence echoed louder than the fall of 3 corporate monsters. And the way he'd held himself, he wasn't adrenaline-fueled. He wasn't erratic. He was grounded, like a stone dropped into a river, unshaken. And the girl, his daughter? She wasn't frightened. She'd watched it all unfold without panic, only a calm understanding that whatever her father was doing, he'd done it before. Heather set down the glass. Her heart was still racing. The next morning, headlines had already twisted the story. Top executives involved in Bellevue altercation. Anonymous vigilante floors corporate giants. Who is the quiet hero of Bellevue? Heather refused to comment publicly. Not yet. She knew how this game worked. Public sympathy could shift like wind. One wrong word, one photo taken out of context, and the hero becomes the aggressor. She wouldn't let the man who saved her be dragged through media filth, not when he'd asked for nothing. Instead, she turned inward. She reviewed the security logs, tracked credit card activity at the Bellevue, checked for calls to law enforcement. Nothing. But there was one thing, one sliver. A folded paper napkin the staff had saved from his table. It had a child's drawing on it, a stick figure with a cape, a little girl with a big smile, and 3 figures on the floor with X's for eyes. In messy crayon letters, beneath the sketch, were the words, "My dad is a good guy." Heather's fingers trembled as she held the napkin. It was the first time in months, maybe years, she felt something other than armor over her skin. A crack. And from that crack, something soft began to grow. She stood by the window again that night, napkin in hand, staring at the city. Where was he now? Did he even know she remembered? Did he care? Was he used to disappearing? And had anyone ever stopped him from doing so? She didn't know his name, but she knew this. She had to find him. Not out of gratitude, not out of curiosity, but because somewhere in the heart of this steel and glass world, a man had quietly reminded her that kindness didn't need to shout. It just needed to show up, even when no one else would. The road home was quiet. Harrison drove with one hand on the wheel, the other resting gently over his daughter's sketchbook, which lay between them on the truck's center console. Outside, the city lights faded into suburban hush. The afterglow of the Bellevue was behind them, but something else lingered, a tension that neither headlights nor radio static could dissolve. Ellie hadn't said a word since they left. She sat curled in the passenger seat, still in her white dress with spaghetti sauce on the hem. Her sneakers tapped rhythmically against the vinyl floor, the only sign that her mind was turning. He glanced sideways. "Want to talk about it?" She shook her head. 5 seconds later, she spoke anyway. "Was that man hurting her?" Harrison nodded slowly. "Yes." "Would he have kept hurting her if you didn't stop him?" "Maybe." She looked down at her hands, small and clean, folded in her lap like a prayer. And everyone just watched. The silence between them thickened. He felt it coil around his chest. Then came the question, the one he'd somehow feared and hoped for. "If that was Mom, would you still have waited?" It landed like a blade between his ribs. He didn't answer. Not immediately, because there was no quick answer. No easy deflection. His jaw clenched. The tires hummed on asphalt. And inside his chest, a war he thought he'd buried years ago reopened with a whisper. He pulled the truck into the driveway. Their home was modest. 1 story, white shutters, a porch swing that creaked in the wind. Harrison shut off the engine but didn't move. Ellie waited, watching him, still expecting an answer. He turned toward her finally. Her eyes were clear, not accusing, just waiting. He saw her mother in those eyes, that same quiet strength, the same way of looking at the world as if it were a puzzle worth solving. He took a breath. "No," he said softly. "If it were your mom, I wouldn't have waited, not even a second." Ellie tilted her head. "Then why'd you wait tonight?" The question wasn't cruel. It was pure, honest, the kind only a child could ask, and only a father would ache to answer. He looked down at his calloused hands. "There was a time," he said, "when I didn't wait. Ever. I'd charge in, fix things, protect people before they even knew they needed it." Ellie listened, wide-eyed. "But one day," he continued, "someone gave me an order to wait. Just a few minutes. Said we didn't have full intel. That charging in might cost us the mission." "What happened?" Harrison's voice dropped. "My best friend went in anyway. Because that's who he was. He saved a child, but he didn't come back out." Ellie's mouth parted slightly. "And I waited," Harrison said. "Just like they told me. I followed orders. I did everything right. And he died." Silence fell again, heavy, honest. Ellie reached over and took his hand. Her grip was small, but it steadied him. "I'm sorry, Daddy," she whispered. He nodded, his throat tight. "That's why I stopped doing what I did," he told her. "Why I left. Why I don't wear the uniform anymore. I told myself, maybe silence is safer." They sat there in the quiet hum of the garage. Then Ellie said, "But you didn't stay silent tonight." He turned to her. "You heard me," she smiled. "I asked if that was Mom. And you stood up. You didn't wait." A soft exhale left him. Children had a way of finding the cracks in armor, not to break you, but to remind you that you were still human underneath. He smiled faintly. "You're right." Inside, Ellie changed into pajamas while Harrison made cocoa, stirring it slowly, watching the milk spin into chocolate spirals. He heard her tiny feet padding down the hallway, her voice floating from the living room. "I drew something." He came over, mug in hand. She held up the sketchbook. A new page. There were two figures, one tall, with big arms and tired eyes. One small, holding his hand. In the background, a restaurant. 3 X-eyed bullies on the floor, and a woman with a crown, smiling in shock. The caption read, "Sometimes heroes wear flannel." Harrison chuckled, his voice caught somewhere between pride and disbelief. Ellie beamed. "You're my hero, Dad." He didn't deserve that title. Not really. But maybe, just maybe, he could grow into it again. That night, after she drifted off to sleep, Harrison sat on the porch swing, the cocoa untouched beside him. The moon hung low over the cul-de-sac, casting silver across the lawn. He replayed the moment. Heather Langford, the fear in her eyes, the refusal to cower, the way she looked at him after it was over, not with gratitude, but with understanding. She hadn't screamed, hadn't called him crazy. She had watched him disappear like a man walking back into the fog. And maybe she hadn't wanted him to go. Harrison sighed. He had lived in the shadows for so long, he'd forgotten what it felt like to matter in plain sight. But Ellie saw it. She'd asked the question. And that question had pulled him back. Back to purpose. Back to voice. Back to the part of himself he thought he'd buried beneath years of silence and guilt. Inside, the porch light flickered, and the house seemed to breathe gently behind him. Tomorrow would be like any other. Packing Ellie's lunch, checking on deliveries, making sure the rent stayed paid. But something had shifted. Not in the world. In him. Because a little girl had asked why. And he'd found he still had an answer. The morning light spilled through Heather Langford's penthouse windows like quiet absolution. Clean, bright, too gentle for the chaos still lingering in her chest. She sat cross-legged on the polished oak floor of her study, a stack of documents spread in a loose circle around her. Legal contracts, HR files, PR drafts. Her world, the empire she'd built, lay in meticulous order. Everything made sense here, but none of it explained him. The man who had appeared from nowhere and dismantled violence with precision, then vanished like a ghost. She hadn't slept. Her mind kept replaying those 15 seconds. The crack of a chair leg against marble, the blur of movement, the way her breath caught when their eyes locked. Steel, calm, and then gone. She didn't even know his name, just that his voice had been silent, but his actions spoke in a language older than fear, and she needed to know who he was. Her company's security team had pulled the footage. Grainy, inconclusive. The restaurant's camera angles were terrible, and the main floor lens caught only shadows and chaos. No facial ID, no tags. Even AI enhancement yielded nothing. It was maddening, until she found it. Not in a digital file, not in surveillance metadata, but in the trash. A crumpled receipt, sticky from a spilled soda, buried under napkins in her handbag. Heather had tossed everything into her clutch the night of the incident, too shaken to think clearly. Now, nearly 48 hours later, she was rifling through remnants like a forensic scientist in stilettos. And there it was, from Bellevue's children's menu, scrawled across the bottom, a shaky red line of ink. No, not ink. Ketchup. Someone had used a ketchup packet like a paintbrush. Thank you. You saved a princess. Underneath, a crude but unmistakable drawing. A man in a cape, a girl with a crown, and 3 bad guys with spiraled eyes like cartoons. Heather's breath hitched. It wasn't just adorable, it was specific. The cape. She remembered now. The man had taken off his heavy military-style jacket and thrown it over her shoulders after the takedown. She hadn't even noticed when he did it. She just felt warm for the first time that night. The girl in the drawing had to be his daughter. The princess. Heather turned the receipt over. No name. But the server's initials were scribbled in the corner. She picked up her phone. Back at Bellevue, the manager was already waiting for her. "I thought you'd never come back," he said nervously. "The media's been sniffing around, but we've kept your name off the record." Heather gave a tight smile. "I'm not here about that." She held up the receipt. "I'm looking for the little girl who drew this. Or her father." The manager blinked. "You kept that?" Heather didn't answer. He glanced at the receipt, squinting. "Yeah, I remember. They sat in the corner booth. He asked for the table closest to the kitchen. Said his kid liked to smell the food while she colored." "Do you have a name?" The manager hesitated. "Well, we don't collect full names unless there's a reservation. But the tab was paid in cash. He signed the slip with an H, that's all." "H," she repeated softly. He nodded. And the girl. She couldn't have been more than 7. Smart kid. Drew all through dinner. Charmed the waitstaff. Even tipped with a packet of ketchup and a paper crane. Heather smiled despite herself. "A paper crane?" "Yeah. Said it was lucky." She stared at the slip in her hand again. Something in her chest stirred. Something she hadn't felt in a long time. A warmth that wasn't adrenaline or fear or boardroom triumph. Hope. Back in her office, Heather sat at her desk and called in her head of security. "I need a list of all Bellevue patrons who paid in cash the night of the incident. Cross-check with any service records that match the name starting with H, military, maybe Navy. And look for any emergency room activity. He might have broken his knuckle." The head of security raised an eyebrow. "Broken knuckle?" Heather tapped her own hand gently. "When he hit the 3rd guy, he led with a hammer fist. No hesitation. But his hand bled. "You want us to track a vigilante?" She looked up, eyes steel sharp. "I want you to find the man who reminded me there are still good people left in this world." The head of security blinked, then nodded. "Yes, ma'am." Later that night, Heather placed the ketchup-stained receipt on her nightstand. She couldn't explain it, but it felt more valuable than any award she'd ever won. More authentic than any luxury she'd bought. There was something sacred about the simplicity of it. A child's thank you written in makeshift ink, a princess rescued, a hero unnamed. She stared at the paper crane beside it, retrieved from the Bellevue manager, now resting next to her lamp. In her world of cold deals and ruthless negotiations, gestures like this didn't exist. But this wasn't her world anymore. Something had changed. And it started with a little girl who'd seen everything. Somewhere across town, that same little girl sat cross-legged on her bed, coloring again. "Dad?" Ellie asked, without looking up. "Yeah?" Harrison replied from the hallway, folding laundry. "Do you think that lady knows it was me?" He paused. "The lady at the restaurant?" "Uh-huh." He came to the doorway, leaned against the frame. "I think," he said slowly, "she might be looking." Ellie smiled, not looking up from her drawing. She was really brave, you know. She was, Harrison agreed, but she was also alone. Harrison nodded. Not anymore. It didn't take long for Heather's legal team to identify the three men from that night. They weren't random aggressors or drunken strangers. No, they were far more dangerous. Douglas Krell, Vincent Tao, and Philip Barringer. All three were executive-level partners at Arcturus Equity, a private investment consortium infamous for aggressive takeovers and morally murky ventures. Arcturus had recently poured billions into the medical tech sector, and they had set their sights on Langford Biocore, Heather's company. Now it made sense. The cornering in the restaurant, the unspoken threats, the eyes that watched to see if she'd break. It wasn't just personal humiliation. It was a message, a power move. Heather's hands shook as she held the report. The file was thick, dense with evidence. Falsified valuation reports, shareholder manipulation schemes, and confidential memos that hinted at their real objective, her company's newest patented stem cell therapy. Langford Biocore's breakthrough was revolutionary. It held the potential to regenerate nerve tissues in patients with spinal injuries. Heather's own mother had died paralyzed, bedridden for years. That loss had fueled her obsession with solving the unsolvable. Her company's innovation wasn't just business, it was legacy. And now these men wanted to gut it for profit. She sank into the leather chair in her penthouse office, staring at the city lights. It wasn't fear she felt, it was fury. Not just because they tried to strip her power, but because they thought she was alone. A knock at the door. It was Marcus, her head of security. Quiet. Loyal. Former Secret Service. "I've reviewed the footage again," he said, handing her a flash drive. "Your mystery man, he knew what he was doing. Classic disarm and disable. 3 moves per target. Non-lethal. No wasted energy. I've seen guys like that in Kabul and Ramadi." Heather looked up, suddenly alert. "Military." "More than that," Marcus nodded. "Special forces. Maybe Navy. Probably Black Ops. The little girl left the drawing. We traced it to a diner outside the city. Booth 6. They come in every Friday morning. Quiet. Man orders black coffee. She gets pancakes shaped like animals." She took the flash drive, but her mind was already racing. The red ink on the bill. The neat, curved handwriting of a child. "You saved a princess." Heather felt something stir deep inside her. Not just the spark of curiosity, but the ache of recognition. She had once been a little girl who believed in heroes too. But this was real. She leaned forward. Tell me about Arcturus. Marcus gave a bitter smile. Arcturus is worse than you think. They've bought off 2 FDA board members and 4 lobbyists. Their model is to corner biotech patents, delay distribution, and bleed the public for profit. And the attack? She asked. Staged. Legal gray area. Public location. Minimal evidence. They calculated it. They wanted you rattled before the board vote next month. Heather exhaled slowly. Not anymore. Across the city, Harrison wiped ketchup off Ellie's chin as she giggled, pretending her pancake was a spaceship. She had no idea what her father carried on his shoulders. The guilt. The choices. The lives lost under his command. And now, the shadow of this woman they had rescued. He didn't expect gratitude, didn't want recognition. But he knew something bigger was at play. Because when those men grabbed her wrists that night, Harrison had seen it. Not just arrogance, but coordination. He didn't just fight them. He read them like a battlefield. And their eyes? They weren't surprised they were being stopped. They were surprised someone dared to. Later that night, Heather stood on her balcony as cold air bit at her skin. She remembered the pressure of fingers bruising her wrist, the silence of bystanders, and the sound, the unmistakable crack of someone falling into a table behind her. 15 seconds, 3 men on the ground, and a ghost in a janitor's coat. She picked up her phone and dialed Marcus. Set a meeting, off record. I want to see them. All of them. Who? The men who fell, she said. And the man who made them fall. Heather Langford had stood in front of more cameras than she could count. She'd been across from prime ministers, billionaires, journalists, even rivals who had tried to destroy her publicly with the kind of venom only money and ego could buy. She had stared them all down, cold, measured, unreadable. But she had never encountered a gaze like his. It wasn't angry, it wasn't proud, it wasn't even curious. It was still. That moment replayed in her mind like a silent film, flickering in shades of slow-motion clarity. One of the attackers had leaned in, his breath rancid with entitlement, his fingers wrapped around her wrist like a chain. The room full of suits and expensive silence had turned into a stage for humiliation. She'd felt her breath catch, not because she was afraid, but because she suddenly realized no one was going to stop it. Until he did. Not with a shout. Not with a warning. Just with his presence. He stepped forward from the back table, coat worn, face shadowed beneath the lights of Bellevue. He placed a glass of water down gently, as if that gesture alone was enough to ripple the air. Then he moved. 3 seconds. One attacker crumpled against a chair. 5 seconds. Another wheezing on the floor, elbow twisted. 15 seconds later, silence. But the only thing Heather remembered clearly wasn't the precision. It was his eyes. She sat alone in her office now, hours before dawn, overlooking the skyline of a city that had never protected her the way he had. Her heels lay abandoned beside the couch. A silk robe hugged her shoulders, yet it couldn't stop the chill that had settled deep in her bones. Her assistant had sent her 10 still frames from security footage, all blurry, all useless. Zoom in on his eyes, Heather had typed, but no AI could replicate what she saw. They were gray, not cold, just deep, like the ocean after a storm. Still, but never dead. She touched her wrist as if the memory was burned into the skin. He hadn't looked at her like a victim. He looked at her like a human being. A soft knock. It was her personal chef, Elena. She held a tray with tea and almond biscuits. You should sleep, Elena said gently. I can't. Elena hesitated. Is it about him? Heather didn't answer. Instead, she whispered. When I was 13, I got lost in downtown Atlanta. It was raining. I was soaked and crying behind a bus stop. A man walked past, saw me, and handed me his umbrella without a word. I never saw him again." She looked up. "I never forgot his face, either." Across the city, in a quiet 2-bedroom apartment, Harrison was helping Ellie brush her teeth. She looked up at him through the mirror, foamy smile wide. "You were amazing, Daddy. Like a real superhero." He ruffled her hair gently. "Superheroes wear capes, Elle. I just wear old boots." "But..." "She looked at you like you were made of light," Ellie said, wiping her mouth. Harrison paused. That look. Yes, he remembered it too. Not gratitude, recognition. Like maybe someone who'd spent too long fighting alone finally saw another warrior in the crowd. But he'd been trained never to linger, never to leave fingerprints on fate. "Did you like her?" Ellie asked. Harrison chuckled softly. "I liked that she stood her ground." "Are we going to see her again?" He hesitated, then said quietly, "Not if we can help it." But fate had other plans. At Langford BioCorps headquarters, Heather received the final forensic analysis. The note written in red ketchup ink, the child's scrawl, was confirmed. A waitress had seen the girl write it, sitting beside a man she called Dad. A few guests recalled her pigtails. One man remembered the father's military posture, the way he scanned the room without seeming to. The trail was real. And for the first time in years, Heather allowed herself to chase something that didn't have a dollar sign attached. She folded the report. She didn't want to own him. She didn't want to expose him. She just wanted to say thank you, even just once. That night, standing by her penthouse window again, Heather whispered into the dark, "You didn't flinch. You didn't judge. You didn't ask. You just acted." Her voice cracked, almost ashamed. "You reminded me that strength doesn't shout." And then, finally, she cried. Not for fear, not for pain, but for the quiet kind of courage she had forgotten existed. The kind that didn't come with cameras, or contracts, or conditions. The kind she saw in his eyes. The rain came down like a curtain of needles, sharp, relentless, and cold enough to steal breath. Heather Langford stood by the side of the road, her black SUV motionless, hazard lights blinking into the fog like a heartbeat slowly fading. The engine had died 20 minutes ago. She had called her driver, but there was no signal in this part of the valley. Her heels were soaked, her hair matted against her cheeks, and even her usually unshakable calm was beginning to crack. She wasn't supposed to be here. A detour, a missed turn, and now this. Stranded on a back road with no one in sight and no help in reach. Until a pair of headlights cut through the rain. The hum of an old engine approached, followed by the gentle grind of brakes. A beat-up silver pickup truck pulled to the shoulder behind her. Its passenger door creaked open. And then, a child's voice. "Do you need help, ma'am?" Heather turned. There, stepping out carefully with a small polka-dot umbrella too bright for such a gray world, was a girl no older than 7. Freckles, pigtails, white sneakers splattered with mud. Heather blinked in disbelief. It was her. The girl from the restaurant. The girl who had written the ketchup note. The girl whose father had vanished like a shadow. Ellie. Before Heather could speak, Ellie had already skipped closer, lifting the umbrella higher. "My dad's a really good mechanic," she offered brightly. "And he's nice, just quiet. But I talk enough for both of us." Heather knelt, her designer coat brushing the soaked ground. "You wrote the note, didn't you?" she asked, her voice soft. Ellie tilted her head. "The princess thing?" Heather smiled through the downpour. "Yeah, that one." Ellie grinned. "You looked like one, but not the kind who waits for someone to save her. The kind who fights dragons with her bare hands." Heather's throat tightened. "That's the nicest thing anyone said to me in years." The sound of a door closing made them both turn. And then she saw him. Harrison stepped out from behind the wheel, slow and steady, as if the rain meant nothing. His boots landed in a puddle with that same quiet authority she remembered. Unannounced, but undeniable. He wore an old flannel shirt under a field jacket, sleeves rolled up, exposing weathered forearms. His face, shadowed beneath the hood of his jacket, held that same stillness. Those same eyes. Her breath caught. For a moment, neither of them moved. Not because of awkwardness, because something ancient and unspoken stood between them, recognition without understanding. "I owe you," she said finally, rising to her feet. Harrison gave a small nod, almost imperceptible. "No," Ellie corrected gently, standing between them, umbrella swaying. "You already paid." She smiled at dinner. "That's payment." Heather laughed, a surprised, warm sound that felt foreign in her own mouth. "My car just stopped," she explained. "It's dead. No lights, no sound." "Pop the hood," Harrison said, already walking forward. She obeyed without hesitation. Ellie leaned in and whispered, "This is the part where he acts like he doesn't want to talk. But he kinda does." Heather chuckled. "Noted." Harrison lifted the hood, scanned the engine in seconds, then ducked under the rain. "Starter's soaked. Might be electrical. I've got cables in the truck." "Do you do this often?" Heather asked, more to break the silence than to expect an answer. "No," Harrison said without looking up. "But I don't like leaving people stuck. Especially not you," something in his silence seemed to say. As he worked, Ellie gave a running commentary. "He was in the Navy. That's why he's all like, kaboom and whoosh and pow. But he never says that. I just do." Heather glanced at him, amused. "Navy?" Harrison met her eyes for a moment. "Long time ago." "Doesn't look that long." He didn't respond, but there was a slight twitch at the corner of his mouth. Not quite a smile. More like a memory trying to rise. Within minutes, the truck's cables were connected. "Try the key," Harrison called. Heather turned the ignition. The engine roared back to life. Heather sat there, stunned. Not just at the car, but at the timing, the randomness, the impossibility. She stepped out again, water pouring down around her. "I was looking for you," she said. "I know," he replied. "You knew." "I figured someone would. Why didn't you come forward?" He looked at her, steady, clear. "Because heroes don't ask for applause." A beat of silence. Then, "That's a shame," she whispered, "because I really wanted to say thank you." Ellie tugged on her dad's sleeve. "Can she come have cocoa with us?" "What?" "It's cold. She probably doesn't eat cocoa anymore, but maybe she should. You're always saying people need warmth more than pride." Heather laughed. Harrison gave in. "Truck's warm," he said simply. Heather climbed into the old pickup, leather cracked, dashboard scratched, a pink backpack tossed in the back seat, and the faint scent of cinnamon. Real life. Not boardrooms, not press junkets. Just warmth. Ellie passed her a thermos. "It's not fancy, but it's real good." Heather took a sip, and for the first time in a very long time. She felt safe. Not because she had bodyguards or security codes, because someone who didn't need to help her had done it anyway. Twice. And somehow, it felt like the beginning of something that might not disappear in the rain. The lights were soft, the rain had stopped, and the air carried that scent of earth and something new. Heather Langford stood outside a modest family-owned diner just off a quiet road, the kind with faded checkered curtains and a bell above the door that rang not out of necessity, but out of tradition. She had insisted. "I want to thank you both properly," she'd said. Harrison had hesitated. Ellie hadn't. She said, "Dinner, Dad, not an interrogation. Just food." And so here they were. Inside, the place smelled of melted cheese, butter, and stories. Vinyl booths, wood-paneled walls, a jukebox in the corner humming faintly with an old Springsteen track. Not the kind of place Heather Langford, CEO of one of the most powerful biotech companies on the West Coast, usually found herself in. And yet, somehow, it felt right. They slid into a corner booth. Ellie in the middle. Harrison sat across from Heather, shoulders relaxed but alert, eyes never staying too long on one thing. Still scanning, still reading the room, Heather noticed. "You never turn it off, do you?" she asked, smiling gently. Harrison met her gaze. "Old habit. I'm guessing it saved your life more than once." He didn't answer. Just nodded, slowly. The waitress came by, cheerful and curious. Ellie ordered pancakes and chocolate milk with the confidence of a queen. Harrison, coffee, black. Heather, surprisingly, just a grilled cheese and tomato soup. "I haven't had this in years," she admitted, glancing at the menu. "Not since my mom used to make it when I was sick." "Then it's the right choice," Ellie said, decisive. "Comfort food heals everything, even powerful women hearts." Heather chuckled. "Is that a medical opinion?" "It's a kid opinion, that's better." They ate, talked, and something strange began to happen. Heather found herself listening, not as a businesswoman calculating outcomes, not as a strategist measuring risks, but as a human being. Ellie told stories about her school, how she named the plants in their tiny garden, how her dad could whistle entire movie scores without missing a note. "She's exaggerating," Harrison said between sips of coffee. "Nope," Ellie said. "He does the whole Star Wars theme when he thinks I'm asleep." Heather laughed. "You've been caught." And Harrison smiled. A real one. Small, but real. It was the kind of smile that softened the room, that made the fluorescent lights feel like candlelight. Then Heather leaned in slightly. "You raised her alone?" "Since she was 3, Harrison replied. "She's extraordinary." He didn't say thank you. He didn't need to. His eyes said it for him, filled with a quiet pride no trophy could measure. Heather toyed with her spoon. "I always thought success was measured in how many people you command. But maybe it's really about the one you raise." Harrison didn't respond immediately, but when he did, it was slow and deliberate. Command fades. Legacy doesn't. Their eyes locked. Not in romance, in understanding. Two people who'd carried weight alone for far too long. The check came. Heather reached for it instinctively. Harrison beat her to it with a simple, "My treat." She raised an eyebrow. "You rescued me twice. Let me buy dinner." "You needed help?" "Not a tab." Ellie slid in between them. "I have $3 and a Pokemon sticker." Both adults burst into laughter. The tension cracked open like spring soil, and something began to grow. As they left the diner, the sky had cleared. The pavement still shimmered from the rain, reflecting streetlights like stars trapped in puddles. Heather walked a little slower, not wanting the evening to end too quickly. "You know," she said, voice softer than usual, "I haven't had a real dinner with someone who wasn't pitching a merger in years." "That's a shame," Harrison said. "Grilled cheese deserves better company." She glanced sideways. "So do people." He stopped, turned to her. There was no grand gesture, no romantic cue from the jukebox, just stillness and clarity. "You're not what I expected," she admitted. "You either," he replied. They reached her car. Ellie climbed into the back seat of Harrison's truck, humming to herself. Heather lingered. "Will I see you again?" It wasn't flirtation. It was a question born from curiosity and connection, from the kind of dinner that wasn't just food, but revelation. "Maybe," Harrison said, and then, with a hint of playfulness that surprised even him, "If your car breaks down again." Heather laughed. "I might be tempted to cut the brakes." He gave her a look, half warning, half smile. "Don't." And with that, he got in the truck, Ellie waving from the window like royalty. Heather stood alone, and for the first time in years, didn't feel lonely. She didn't know where the road would lead next. But tonight, she had sat across from someone who didn't need her wealth, her name, or her company. He had only seen her. And it was enough. It began with a search. Late at night, in her sleek penthouse overlooking the city skyline, Heather Langford sat at her glass desk, fingers gliding over her keyboard. The world of technology had always bowed to her will. Algorithms, networks, databases. She could find almost anyone. But this man, this quiet man who had stepped in like a ghost and vanished like a myth, he was a void in the system. No social media, no business profile, no military commendations publicly listed, nothing, until she dug deeper and found Harrison Cole. His name appeared in a classified military mention linked to a failed covert operation in Syria nearly a decade ago. Redacted files, blurred timelines, anonymous sources. But buried within congressional archives, Heather found enough. Lieutenant Commander Harrison Cole, former Navy SEAL team leader, known internally as Ghost Hawk, a man with a reputation for strategy, precision, and unmatched calm under pressure. He had led rescue missions in Somalia, Iraq, and Eastern Europe. 23 hostages saved, 0 casualties. Decorated, though he'd turned down several commendations, including the Navy Cross. Then, he vanished from service. No ceremony. No press. Just one final mission. And silence. Heather leaned back in her chair, eyes fixed on the screen. The details chilled her. That last operation, Operation Riverglass, was a disaster. The extraction failed. A miscommunicated order cost 3 team members their lives. The media never learned the full truth. But military tribunals cleared Harrison of any wrongdoing. He hadn't failed. The system had. And yet, he took responsibility. He resigned. Walked away from everything. No lawsuits. No memoir. Just left. Heather's chest tightened. There was no scandal, no fall from grace, only the weight of loss, and perhaps guilt that never had a place to land. She clicked on another file, a faded photo taken at a humanitarian compound in Sudan. Harrison, in civilian clothes, helping unload crates of medical supplies. No press coverage, no insignia, just quiet service. Another photo, years later, in a small Oregon town. A janitor's badge. Same man, same eyes. Stoic, kind, unassuming. She closed the laptop and sat in silence. The next morning, she couldn't focus. The boardroom felt colder than usual. Her team was talking about quarterly growth, acquisitions, European patents. She nodded in all the right places. But her mind wasn't there. It was with a man who cleaned hospital floors at night, who raised a daughter like a sunflower in the shade, who took down 3 corporate predators with surgical efficiency and left before anyone could say thank you. A man who had seen war but taught peace to his child. A man who didn't wear his past like armor, but buried it beneath humility. That evening, Heather found herself at a park on the edge of town, not by accident. She had remembered Ellie mentioning the name, Briarwood Elementary. And sure enough, there they were, Ellie on the swings, and Harrison sitting on a nearby bench, sketching something in a notepad. She didn't interrupt, just watched. Ellie's laughter echoed through the trees. Her ponytail bounced as she swung higher, shouting, "Look, Dad!" with each lift. Harrison would look up, smile softly, then return to his drawing. There was no flashiness in him, no need to impress. He was just present. And that, Heather realized, was rare. Later, as she approached slowly, Ellie spotted her first. "Hi, Miss Heather," she called out, waving excitedly. "Want to see my swing trick?" Heather smiled. "Always." As Ellie performed what she called a superhero jump, Harrison rose, brushing his hands on his jeans. The wind tousled his longish hair, giving him the look of a man halfway between soldier and artist. "I wasn't expecting you," he said, not coldly, but cautious. Heather held his gaze. "I wasn't expecting you either. Not the first time, not the second." He offered a small nod. "Guess we're even." She paused, then gently said, "I found your name." He didn't flinch. "I figured you would. I read everything I could." "Most of it's classified," he said, his voice low. "The parts that weren't," she said, "were enough to tell me who you are." He looked away. Heather continued, "You didn't fail that mission." "I lost men," he said, flatly. "You didn't lose your humanity." Silence stretched between them like a drawn curtain. Ellie ran up with grass in her hair and a giant grin. "I named that squirrel after you," she told Heather, "because it's fast and it's smart, but it always hides its snacks." Harrison chuckled. "She has a gift for analogies." Heather looked at him. "She has a gift for truth." They stood there, strangers no longer, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in oranges and deep violets. Heather said softly, "I've spent my life surrounded by men who talk too much, demand too much, take too much." "And now?" Harrison asked. "I met one who said nothing, and gave more than anyone I've ever known." She didn't say more. She didn't need to, and neither did he. The storm didn't strike all at once. It began as whispers. An anonymous blog post surfaced online, accusing Heather Langford of insider trading. Within hours, it was picked up by a second-rate news site, then a syndicated business outlet. Within a day, her name trended for all the wrong reasons: fraud, embezzlement, hostile takeover. The headlines didn't ask questions. They declared guilt. "Silicon Valley Ice Queen built her fortune on lies," one screamed. Another, "Heather Langford under fire for unethical medical deals." All false, all carefully timed. Heather stared at her office wall as her assistant read the updates aloud. The room seemed colder. Her breath felt shorter. She had weathered corporate attacks before. But this was personal. And it wasn't over. Her phone buzzed. A voicemail from one of the board members. "Heather, we need to talk. The situation's become untenable." She didn't listen to the rest. They were folding. These weren't just rumors. Someone had orchestrated a precise campaign, a digital and reputational strike designed to disarm her before she could respond. Every move had been calculated: press, social media, stock fluctuations. Stakeholders were panicking, investors withdrawing, contracts suspended. But why? Why now? And then she saw it. An email, no name, no subject, just a single line. "Sell the biotech patents, or next time we won't miss." Attached, a photo. Grainy. Zoomed in. But unmistakable. Ellie. At school, Heather's heart stopped. That night, she didn't go home. She drove, aimless, the city lights blurring in her rear view. She ended up at a dark overlook, where the skyline shimmered below like a galaxy spread on concrete. Her hands trembled on the steering wheel. Someone had crossed the line. Not just business. Now it was war. She thought of Harrison, of the way his eyes never wavered, even under pressure, of the way he had shielded her without hesitation, of Ellie's laughter, the lightness in that girl that the world seemed hell-bent on extinguishing. She couldn't allow it. She wouldn't. The next morning, Heather was different. Colder. Sharper. Resolved. She walked into the boardroom where 6 of her senior executives sat, murmuring nervously. A few looked away. One avoided eye contact altogether. She dropped the printed email on the table. "Read it," she said. No one moved. "You think I'm the threat to this company?" she asked, voice level. "Look again." The room fell silent. One of them finally whispered, This can't be real." "They're coming for us," Heather replied. "And they'll do it from the shadows. They don't want to fight. They want surrender." Then she looked each of them in the eye. "I don't surrender." She drove straight to Harrison's place. No appointment, no warning. Ellie opened the door in pajamas, eyes wide and joyful. "Miss Heather!" Heather tried to smile. "Hi, sweetheart. Is your dad home?" Harrison appeared behind her, towel over his shoulder, drying his hands. His expression shifted the moment he saw Heather's face. He didn't need an explanation. He just stepped aside and said, "Come in." She showed him everything, the emails, the photos, the timeline of attacks. He listened without interrupting, occasionally exchanging glances with Ellie, who sat coloring at the kitchen table. Heather hesitated at the last part. The threat to Ellie. She lowered her voice. "I think they're capable of anything, and I don't want your daughter caught in the crossfire." Harrison didn't flinch. "I've kept her safe this long," he said. "But it's not enough to stay hidden anymore, is it?" Heather shook her head. "Not when they play in the dark." He was quiet for a long moment. Then, "Tell me everything you know about the people behind this." They sat together at his small dining table, night falling outside the window. Heather spoke in careful detail. The biotech patents her company had developed, technology capable of reducing post-surgical recovery by 80%, still unlicensed, but worth billions, and how a multinational investment group had tried to buy her out a year ago. She had refused. Now, they were back. And this time, they weren't offering. They were taking. Through fear. Through silence. Heather looked up. "You know this better than anyone. When they stop sending lawyers, they send something else." Harrison nodded. Men in suits first. Then, men with no names. That night, while Ellie slept in the next room, Harrison unfolded a large, faded map across the table. Not of a city, not even of a country, but of people. He sketched out connections, business ties, shell companies, former military contractors turned corporate mercenaries. Each name led to another. Each lead, a trap waiting to be uncovered. Heather watched in awe, not just at what he knew, but how he thought. Every step of his mind was precise, layered, and lethal. This wasn't a janitor. This was a man who once led black ops in the dead of night and made it home every time. Heather finally asked, "Why did you walk away from all of this?" Harrison didn't look up. "Because sometimes silence is safer than truth." She leaned forward. "But now?" He paused, then met her gaze. "Now it's personal." Outside, in the darkness beyond the porch light, a black car idled for a moment too long before pulling away. The shadows were moving, but this time, they weren't the only ones watching. The wind carried a crisp chill through the city plaza, where white tents fluttered above a sea of guests gathered for the Langford Foundation's annual charity gala. Strings of warm Edison bulbs twinkled above, casting a soft glow over tables draped in linen and laughter that floated with clinking glasses. It was the kind of night made for headlines and handshakes, where fortunes pledged themselves to good causes and camera flashes made everyone a little more human. Heather Langford stood near the main stage, elegance wrapped in navy silk, her blonde hair pinned in soft waves. She held a champagne flute loosely, half listening to a donor's story, while her eyes drifted elsewhere, searching the crowd. Not for clients, not for investors, for one man. And his daughter. Ellie had insisted on wearing her favorite white dress, with stars stitched along the hemline and a clip-on bow that kept tilting sideways. She held Harrison's hand like it was the only thing anchoring her in the crowd. Heather spotted them near the children's corner, where volunteers helped kids decorate cupcakes and paint tiny birdhouses. She felt her chest loosen a little, They were here. They were safe. For now. The mayor stepped up to the podium. Lights brightened. Cameras rotated. Heather excused herself and moved toward the front row. She was halfway there when she felt it. Something primal, electric. Goosebumps up her arms, the air stiffening around her. Then came the scream and the sound of tires. From the far end of the plaza, a black SUV tore through the barriers, engine howling, headlights slicing across the gala like knives. The crowd shrieked, parting like water. Security radios crackled too late. The vehicle didn't swerve. It surged forward, locked in. Toward her, Heather froze. The world slowed. She couldn't move, couldn't blink. The SUV was 30 feet away, then 20. The driver's face was hidden behind glare and glass, but the intent was clear. Cold and merciless. This wasn't a malfunction. This was an execution. She felt a force yank her backwards, just as the bumper screamed past, missing her by inches. She landed hard, elbows scraping concrete, lungs stunned. Then the explosion. The SUV smashed into the steel base of the stage, crumpling like a crushed can. Smoke hissed. Alarm screamed. The crowd panicked in waves, but all Heather could do was turn her head and see Harrison, standing over her. Eyes scanning, breathing steady. Muscles coiled like a spring. Then her gaze shifted. Ellie. The girl had been near the dessert table just moments before. Heather's heart seized. She staggered up, ignoring the burning in her knees. Ellie! Harrison was already moving. They found her under an overturned bench, clutching her shoulder and biting back tears. Her dress was torn, arms scraped, but she was breathing. Alive. Heather dropped beside her, voice shaking. Sweetheart. Oh my God, are you okay? Ellie nodded, but tears slipped down her cheeks. I didn't mean to run. Heather wrapped her arms around the girl and broke into sobs, silent at first, then heaving. She hadn't cried like this in years. Not in boardrooms, not in breakups, not even at her father's funeral. But now, watching this little girl try to be brave, it broke her. Paramedics rushed in. Police cordoned off the scene. The wrecked SUV sat steaming against the stage, airbag deployed, driver's seat empty. No sign of the assailant. Another ghost in the machine. Heather sat on the curb, her gown dirty and torn, as Harrison handed Ellie a juice box and watched the paramedics wrap her arm in gauze. His face hadn't changed. Still calm. Still unreadable. But his jaw was set like stone. Someone hacked the car, he said quietly. Brakes were rerouted through the onboard diagnostics. Whoever did this knew your schedule. Your security detail was looped out. Heather wiped her eyes. Makeup smudged. They weren't trying to scare me anymore. No, he said. They're eliminating loose ends. She looked up. And Ellie? He nodded. Collateral. Heather's fingers curled into fists. I'm done waiting for them to make the next move. You won't have to, Harrison said, because I already am. Back at Harrison's modest apartment later that night, Heather sat on his threadbare couch, watching Ellie sleep on a fold-out bed, a warm blanket draped over her small frame. The girl had cried herself to exhaustion. Heather's voice broke the silence. Why do they hate me so much? They don't, Harrison said from the shadows of the kitchen, where he stood washing blood off his knuckles. They fear what you built, the biotech patents, the control. You refuse to sell, so they're trying to erase you. She glanced over. And you? Why do you keep saving me? He paused, drying his hands, then walked over, settling into the chair across from her. Because I've buried too many people who were worth saving, he said simply, and I'm not going to bury you. Their eyes met. No words followed, just quiet understanding, just shared weight. Later, as Harrison stood watch by the window, rifle leaning against the wall, Heather rose from the couch, walked over to him, and whispered, "I want to fight back, but I don't know how." "You don't have to," he said. "You just have to decide how far you're willing to go." She looked toward Ellie, peaceful, innocent, then back to Harrison. "All the way." He nodded. "Then it starts now." The world had changed for Harrison Cole, not in color or sound, but in clarity. He had seen it before, on foreign soil, in smoke-thick jungles and war-torn cities. The line where peace ended and something colder began. That line had come home, and someone had tried to cross it, through his daughter. That made it personal. Harrison stood in the quiet hum of his garage, once a place for oil changes and old radios. Now it had become a war room. Blueprints of traffic grids and satellite prints of city blocks were tacked to a corkboard. The screens flickered with CCTV footage, highway cams, and drone shots downloaded from public airspace channels. Heather watched from the threshold, still in awe. "You're not just a bodyguard," she murmured. "No," he said, not turning. "I'm a systems guy. War isn't about guns. It's about structure, vulnerabilities, flow." He pointed to a digital map. "This is how they move. This is how we win." Harrison knew these men wouldn't stop. The corporation behind them operated like a private military. Clean hands on paper, dirty fingers behind glass towers. They didn't use brute force. They outsourced chaos. He started with what he could control: the car. He pulled the onboard telemetry from Heather's crashed vehicle. Buried beneath diagnostic logs, he found it, an override signal, masked as a firmware update, sent from a remote server in Jakarta. But the server was a ghost, traced through 10 countries, hosted on a shell company owned by another shell company. Typical. Still, they made a mistake. They had to test the signal before they launched it. And someone always leaves a footprint when they test. 2 nights later, Harrison was in the shadows of a parking structure downtown, hoodie up, gloves on. He watched the man emerge from a tech lab, one of the lower-tier consultants contracted to test vehicle vulnerabilities. The man never saw it coming. Harrison disarmed him with 3 moves, pinned him to the pavement, and extracted the burner phone from his coat. No broken bones, just a bruised ego and a ruptured sense of invincibility. "Who gave the order?" Harrison asked. The man shook his head. Harrison leaned in close, voice razor-sharp. "You're an engineer. You understand leverage? You just felt a small one. I can apply pressure in ways you can't code against." 30 seconds later, Harrison walked away with a name by name. Step by step, he worked his way up the chain. A master of controlled escalation. He moved like a shadow through corporate back doors, contractor offices, private security check-in logs, and offshore payment trails. At each stop, he left behind no evidence, only confusion. He wasn't just dismantling a network, he was studying it. "Most people look at a system and see what's visible," he explained to Heather one night over black coffee. "I look for where the system bleeds." Heather stared at him. "You're not just a soldier. You're a detective." "I was trained to be both. In special ops, you don't just fight. You learn, you listen, you think." She exhaled slowly. "And what's your next move?" "The trap." He called it a pressure loop. It was a technique from counterinsurgency playbooks. You force the enemy to act. You apply tension, not enough to make them run, just enough to make them reveal their chain of command. Harrison leaked false intel through a compromised security consultant's email, a tip that Heather would be attending a confidential board vote in a remote villa with no private security on site. In truth, Heather would be halfway across town at a children's hospital fundraiser. The villa was bait, and Harrison would be waiting. Night fell with a misty drizzle. The villa sat in a clearing, its windows dark, the air humming with false calm. Harrison moved like a ghost between trees. He'd set up thermal cameras, tripwire drones, and pressure-sensitive mats. Not to stop them, but to study them. When the 3 men arrived, dressed like civilians, but walking like ex-military, Harrison didn't strike immediately. He let them move, let them feel safe, let them reveal their formation. Only when they stepped into the greenhouse did he strike. The first man didn't even get to turn. Harrison disarmed him, twisted his arm, and used the momentum to throw him through the glass door. The second reached for his pistol, but Harrison was already behind him. A precise chop to the neck, a sweep to the leg, and the man crumpled with a groan. The third tried to run. Harrison tackled him in the mud, locked him in a chokehold, and whispered, "Who's next?" It wasn't a question. It was a promise. By dawn, he had everything. Names, voice recordings, financial links to a Cayman shell account, and internal memos tying the hit to a senior executive in the biotech firm that wanted Heather's patent. When he returned to Heather's office, he laid out the data drive on her desk. "This isn't just insurance," he said. "It's ammunition." Heather stared at it, silent. "You can take it to the police, or the press, or straight to the shareholders." Heather looked up, eyes sharper than ever. "No, I'm taking it to war, to..." That night, Ellie sat curled in Harrison's lap, listening to one of his stories about the hawk who didn't make noise, but always found the fox. Heather watched from the doorway. "You really think they're done?" she asked. Harrison didn't look away from Ellie. "No, but next time, they won't know what hit them." Heather stepped closer. "Neither will we." He looked up. There was a quiet understanding between them now, the kind forged not by words, but by shared fire. The battlefield had changed, but the mission remained. Protect the innocent, strike the shadow, and never, ever, let the enemy feel safe. The truth, when revealed properly, doesn't scream. It detonates. And when Harrison Cole pressed send, uploading 6.3 gigabytes of encrypted evidence to the FBI's cybercrime division, detonation began. It started in quiet conference rooms, inside encrypted inboxes. It crawled through legal firewalls like a whisper through a cathedral. Judges woke early. Agents canceled weekends. One folder was titled, plainly, Medical Monopoly, Internal Crimes, and Covert Operations. But beneath the cold title lay an arsenal of truth. Heather sat in her office, staring out the tall glass window. The city buzzed far below, unaware that its skyline, its very commerce, was about to shift. She clutched a thick, leather-bound folder. Inside were the printed files Harrison had gathered. Bank routing slips that showed laundering through 7 countries. Burner phone logs linking Black Ops consultants to executive inboxes. Surveillance stills of the 3 men attacking her in the restaurant, timestamps and all. A secret memo, signed by a VP, authorizing tactical resolution of dissenting shareholders. "God," she whispered, her voice cracking. "This isn't just corporate pressure. It's organized crime in a tailored suit." Harrison nodded quietly. "And it ends today." They called it Operation Disclosure. The FBI had been circling the biotech conglomerate for months, but the company was insulated by layers of shell firms, NDAs, and legal firewalls. Whistleblowers disappeared. Testimonies changed. Evidence vanished. But Harrison's file wasn't speculation. It was architecture. "I didn't give them theories," he told Heather. "I gave them schematics." When the FBI cross-checked his intel with dormant financial trails and international subpoenas, dots began to connect like lightning striking steel. And once lightning struck, thunder followed fast. By 6:45 a.m. on a rainy Thursday, 32 agents in Kevlar moved across 5 states. In San Diego, a white-collar accountant with 3 passports was pulled from a golf course. In Manhattan, a vice president's penthouse was stormed just as he tried to erase a hard drive. In Zurich, an international intermediary was stopped at customs with a briefcase of bearer bonds and fake ID. Back in Los Angeles, local police, accompanied by federal agents, arrived at the high-rise headquarters of Vericon Biotech, where a now silent boardroom awaited charges of fraud, conspiracy, and attempted murder. The media couldn't keep up. Breaking news tickers screamed across every channel. Major biotech conglomerate implicated in criminal conspiracy. FBI raids trigger global shockwaves. Whistleblowers' evidence unveils deep corruption. And Heather, once branded a difficult CEO and unstable shareholder, was suddenly at the center of vindication. But she didn't feel victorious. She felt quiet. She sat beside Ellie on a couch in her office, watching the news. The little girl clutched her sketch pad, drawing 2 caped figures, a man with strong arms and a woman with a crown. A heart floated between them. "Is that us?" Heather asked. Ellie beamed. "You're the queen. Daddy's the shield." Heather smiled softly. "Then who are you?" "I'm the voice." Heather's throat tightened. Later that day, a press conference was held in the federal courthouse. Heather approached the podium in a tailored charcoal suit, eyes calm but unwavering. Cameras flashed. Microphones buzzed. She didn't use a script. "I once believed that silence kept you safe," she began. "That if you endured long enough, the storm would pass. I was wrong. Silence doesn't protect you. It cages you." She paused, voice steady. "Today, we opened that cage. Not just for me, but for every employee, patient, and parent who's ever been silenced by power." Gasps echoed as she held up the FBI's formal letter of acknowledgement, citing her as key evidence provider and cooperating witness. "And I didn't do it alone," she added, turning to the side. Harrison stood near the back, not in a suit, just in his old military jacket, still quiet, still unnoticed by most, but not by her. Not anymore. Vericon's board was dissolved. Assets frozen. Investigations widened globally. Heather's own company, once a minority subsidiary, was freed from control. Her name cleared, her leadership restored, and her innovation in biogenetic therapy, long buried under bureaucracy, was now greenlit for FDA approval. But more than headlines and boardroom shifts, something deeper changed. Harrison no longer needed to hide, and Heather no longer needed to prove herself. They had survived the storm. That night, the 3 of them sat under the porch light behind Harrison's modest home. Crickets chirped. Rain drizzled gently in the trees. Ellie was asleep on Heather's shoulder, a blanket wrapped around her small frame. "She asked me today if monsters wear ties," Heather said softly. Harrison chuckled. "They wear whatever helps them blend in." Heather looked at him. "But so do heroes." He didn't reply, just sipped his tea, eyes scanning the horizon. She touched his hand gently. "Thank you, Harrison." He turned to her finally. "You were never the one who needed saving." She blinked. "You just needed someone to stand beside you," he added. And in that silence between them, there was understanding. The operation was over. But their story had just begun. The courtroom smelled faintly of pine polish and anxiety. Rows of reporters, officials, and curious onlookers filled every bench. The air was charged, as if something sacred were about to unfold. At the front, beneath the solemn crest of justice, the judge adjusted her glasses and tapped the gavel once, just enough to call the room to stillness. Outside, a storm hovered, threatening rain. Inside, a different kind of storm was waiting to break. Heather sat straight-backed at the witness table, her navy suit crisp, her hands steady. She wasn't here as a CEO today. She wasn't here as a survivor. She was here as a voice. Behind her sat Harrison in a clean shirt, not a suit, not a uniform, just himself. Beside him was Ellie, feet barely touching the floor, hands folded politely in her lap. Heather glanced back once. He gave a slow nod. That was enough. The prosecution's case had been built methodically. Facts, documents, footage, financial trails. But now, it was time for something more powerful. Something human. The door opened. A man entered with careful steps, aided by a cane. He was in his 80s, with a long tweed coat, hands that trembled slightly from age, and eyes that still held fire. The courtroom recognized him immediately. George Whitmore, retired city planner, beloved war veteran, and once a silent diner at the scene of Heather's attack. He stepped up to the witness stand, raised his hand, swore the oath, and began. "I was there the night those men attacked her," he said, voice weathered but unwavering. "I was sitting in the corner booth. I saw everything, heard everything. But I didn't do anything." He paused. You could hear the hum of fluorescent lights overhead. I looked down at my plate, like a coward, because I thought, it wasn't my fight. I'm too old, too weak, too late. A beat. But then, George's eyes scanned the courtroom, stopping on Harrison. He stood up, not loud, not angry, just still. I don't even know if he said a word, but something in him, his presence, shifted the air. He touched his chest. It made me sit up straighter. Like I owed the world something more than silence. The courtroom listened, breathless. I saw him step between those men and the woman. I saw him shield her with his own body. And I saw those men, those predators, hesitate. Because that man didn't come from fear. He came from purpose. George's voice broke then, just a little. That night, I went home ashamed, not because I was weak, but because I let silence win. But he reminded me who I used to be. He looked toward Harrison again, this time not with apology, but with gratitude. That man gave me back my spine. Heather took the stand next. She didn't look at her notes. "My name is Heather Lane. I'm the CEO of Lane Biotech. I've built labs, led teams, negotiated billion-dollar contracts. But I couldn't stand up to 3 men in a restaurant without shaking." Her voice held, unwavering. "And I've learned something. Strength isn't always loud. Sometimes it's found in the man who doesn't want the spotlight, who doesn't want applause, who simply does the right thing, because that's who he is." She paused. "The man who changed the course of this case isn't a senator, or a billionaire, or a general." She turned slowly. "He's a father." Gasps and camera flashes followed. Heather didn't flinch. She bowed her head slightly as if to say, "Let the world take that in." Outside the courthouse, the press swarmed. But for once, they didn't chase scandal. They chased meaning. "The man who saved the CEO remains anonymous. A little girl's father became the world's quietest hero. Justice delivered, thanks to one man's courage and silence. Reporters called his name, begged for interviews. Harrison, just a few words. Sir, can we get a statement? What motivated you to act?" But Harrison didn't stop. He simply took Ellie's small hand in his, nodded politely, and walked past the chaos. Ellie looked up at him. "Dad?" "Yes, sweetheart." "Did we win?" He smiled down at her, eyes soft. "We did what was right. That's better." Later, when the sun broke through the clouds, Heather stood quietly in the shadow of the courthouse steps. She watched Harrison and Ellie disappear into the street crowd. Simple, unnoticed, free. She didn't call after him. She didn't need to. Sometimes a testimony isn't just words spoken on a stand. Sometimes it's a life lived with dignity. The sun was generous that morning, as if it, too, understood the weight of new beginnings. The ribbon fluttered in the soft breeze, stretched across the modest but radiant entrance of the newly built center. Carved into the limestone arch above were 5 simple words: Ellie and her dad, Self-Defense Academy. No logos, no corporate insignia, just a promise. Inside, the gym was clean, bright, and wide open, lined with mats, mirrors, and sunlight streaming through windows. But what stood out wasn't the space, it was the spirit that filled it. A spirit born from courage, quiet sacrifice, and love. Heather stood by the podium, wearing something far simpler than the suits she used to be known for. A soft blue blouse, no heels, no diamonds, just honesty. Her voice, when she spoke, was both firm and full of grace. "Today, we're not launching a business," she said. "We're launching a belief that no child, no woman, no elder, no vulnerable person should ever feel helpless." Cameras clicked. But this wasn't about headlines anymore. Heather looked out at the crowd, single mothers holding their children's hands, veterans who once felt invisible, teenagers who had been bullied, elders who had lived too long in silence. She glanced toward the side, where Harrison stood with Ellie. He hadn't moved to the front. He didn't want to. But his presence was unmistakable. Solid, calm, like the pillar of an old oak tree. The crowd parted as Ellie stepped forward, holding a piece of folded paper. It was her drawing. She had used bold crayon lines. In the center stood a man with strong arms, shielding a group of small figures behind him. Some scared, some crying, some reaching up with hope. The man's face wasn't detailed, but his stance said everything. Ellie held it high, proud and unafraid. Then she walked to the microphone, stood on a wooden crate to reach it, and spoke with the kind of sincerity only a child could offer. "My name's Ellie. I'm 8, and this is my dad." She turned and pointed to Harrison. The room turned, too. The hush was reverent. "He doesn't like being called a hero," Ellie said. "But he is one. Not 'cause he's big or strong, but 'cause he never walks away." She lifted the drawing again. "He told me once, you don't have to be famous to matter. Just don't turn your back when someone needs you." Somewhere, a woman sniffled. A man's shoulders trembled. And Heather felt her throat tighten. After the ribbon was cut, people gathered around Harrison, not with fanfare, but with sincerity. A veteran with trembling hands asked if he could train beside him. A mother thanked him for protecting women like me. A teenage girl asked if Ellie could be her friend. But Harrison, he just smiled softly, nodded, and stayed close to Ellie. Heather approached him, her eyes glinting. "You knew I'd name it after her." He shrugged. "She's the reason I stepped in. Twice." Heather laughed. "And the third time?" He looked at her. "That one was for you." She didn't say anything right away. She didn't need to. Some things, when spoken, lose their magic. But her hand reached out, gently brushing his. He didn't pull away. Outside, the day began to shift toward golden hour. The clouds had parted completely, as if giving the world permission to hope again. Ellie ran ahead on the sidewalk, swinging her backpack playfully. Heather and Harrison followed behind, quiet, side by side. There were no cameras now, no danger, no boardrooms or battlefields, just the rhythm of footsteps on concrete and the comfort of presence. Heather spoke softly. "You've changed my life, you know." "I didn't mean to," Harrison replied, almost apologetic. She smiled. "Exactly. That's how I knew you did." He stopped walking. She turned. "You're not afraid of silence," she said, reading his pause. "But I used to be. Silence meant emptiness to me. Loneliness. Now it means peace." He looked at her, and this time, he really saw her. Not as the CEO, not as the woman from the restaurant, but as a soul that had finally come home to itself. Later that evening, long after the crowd had gone, Ellie slipped a copy of her drawing into a frame. Beneath it, she wrote in her clumsy cursive, "Some heroes don't wear capes. They wear quiet eyes, old boots, and a heart that doesn't run away." Ellie and her dad, if this story moved you even just a little, we'd love to hear from you. Where in the world are you watching from? Leave us a comment. It's always a joy to see how far these quiet stories can travel. And if you haven't already, subscribe to the channel. Here, we believe in stories that heal, stories that remind us of kindness, courage, and the quiet strength of ordinary people. From our little corner of the internet to wherever you are, thank you for spending time with us. We truly appreciate you. Until next time, stay kind, stay hopeful, and never underestimate the power of a quiet man.